Welcome back to Outlook Portland. My guest this morning is Commissioner Dan Gardner of the Bureau of Labor and Industry here in Oregon. Dan, some historic changes in our discrimination laws, our anti-discrimination laws, were adopted by this past legislature. And I want to start with some changes concerning the fair housing laws, which are the federal laws that govern non-discrimination, typically in the rental housing market. What were the changes?
Well, I think the changes were that for several years our laws have not been substantially equivalent with the federal law. Binding structures and other things in federal law have changed and Oregon law hadn't caught up. And we've been trying for 3 sessions to get a law change here so that we're substantially equivalent with the federal law. What it will allow us to do is to work with Housing and Urban Development, with the federal government, to negotiate into a contract with them like many, many other states do, so that the housing discrimination cases can be brought here to Portland.
And so people understand, currently, if you have a fair housing complaint, you have to file it with an agency in Seattle, Washington.
That you do. With Housing and Urban Development in Seattle, Washington, the investigations are done out of Seattle. And I just think it's very, very critically important that Oregon investigations on situations like this be done in Oregon.
Now, some folks who understand the budget crunch that the state has had, and particularly the budget crunch in your office, might ask, well, it's wonderful that we'll be doing these investigations out of your office, but do you have the resources necessary?
Well, the resources will come with the contract with Housing and Urban Development to be able to do this work. So they'll be paying for us to do the investigations. It doesn't cost Oregon taxpayers out of the Oregon tax system a dime.
Now, the fair housing laws are near and dear to my heart, Dan, because for many years the Congress in the 70s was stymied in getting the so-called fair housing amendments passed. Those amendments changed the law with respect to penalties and remedies. They also extended protection to families, so you could no longer discriminate against the family in rental housing. And there was a congressman from New York who worked diligently to bring all the sides together and ultimately helped cut the deal. And he was my father, Hamilton Fish. I'm a proud Democrat. He was a wonderful moderate Republican. But it was one of his proudest accomplishments was getting the Fair Housing Act amendments passed. And I'm really delighted that now Oregon law will be consistent with federal law and that your office will have the jurisdiction to investigate complaints.
Well, thank you. We're glad to do it. I think it's important work.
Now, another big change in discrimination law occurred, and that is non-discrimination for gays and lesbians, a historic change in our civil rights laws. Talk about that for a minute.
Well, currently there's about 16 different municipalities across the state, the city of Portland, Multnomah County, Lane County, Corvallis, etc., that have city or county ordinances on non-discrimination. We actually right now do the enforcement for most of those municipalities through contract. I mean, there's a lot of situations that we run across where people are in their job, suddenly it's discovered that they're gay or lesbian, and instead of being on an upward spiral through their job, they end up being on a downward spiral because of
their
sexual orientation. And there's no reason in the world that should be a consideration in that. And we constantly get calls from across the state, from Baker City or wherever, asking if there's any protection. And if they don't have a local city ordinance, there is absolutely no protection whatsoever until this law was passed by this legislature.
What say to some of the critics of this law who argue that this is, in effect, extending special rights to one class of people?
It's extending equal rights, not special rights. There is no reason one should be unemployed because of their orientation.
And under this law, the only thing that's going to change is that an employer is going to have a reason other than someone's sexual orientation to take action like disciplining or terminating.
Absolutely. You can still discipline or terminate based upon their actions, just not upon their orientation.
Why did it take so long to get this change in the law?
You know, that's a good question. I was in the legislature in 1997. We actually passed a bill out of the Oregon House. I was one of the 40 yes votes on it. Went over to the Senate, and it died over in the Senate. We've been trying for a number of years. I think really, it's based upon some of the attitudes of some of the more conservative legislators.
Misperceptions, some discrimination.
I think discrimination, misperceptions, and just confusion over the issue.
Well, I think it's a proud moment for Oregon to finally realize that we will not tolerate discrimination on the basis of status. and sexual orientation and status. Dan, we have to take a break. When we come back, there's a lot of politics to talk about at the national level and locally, and I'll ask you about that. This is Outlook Portland. Please stay tuned.
Outlook Portland with Nick Finch is brought to you by Altamano Travel. Call or visit the Altamano location nearest you for your next vacation.